All right. Hello and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm here with an extra special treat. I'm joined by Dr. Gary Habermas. Hey, Gary, how are you?
Doing well, Dale, and it's good to see you again after talking a lot more frequently a long time ago. I cherish the times we have these days. So good to hear from you. You got a great site and blog and debates. Do a great job.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I miss our frequent chat. We should probably like start that up just to chat every once in a while and stuff like that, like we used to. But
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, it's so basically today though, I did want to bring you on because I think it's been important. I've seen a lot of skeptics and stuff. We're going to leave them unnamed, but they've been kind of responding and raising certain objections to your volume three.
yeah.
And I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of give your the truth on this and respond to
Sure.
some of these things. So yeah, that's
Yeah, Dale, let me ask you a question up front. You just brought something up. Do you see more on volume three than you did on two or one or two? Which to me are far more substantial in terms of data.
You know what? I do think that there's been more attacks on volume three,
Really?
just because they a lot of skeptics see this is kind of your main claim that they haven't had access to for a long time. Like there's been the claims about, hey, I've surveyed all these scholars and stuff, but this is kind of now it's out there published. Whereas the substantive arguments, they've seen a lot of
Yeah, strangely enough, the only careful count that I did, and even that was just on the spot. I didn't do anything MA or PhD thesis wise, but the only one I counted instead of just giving my opinion off the top of my head on the guys who I've worked with, the only one is Empty Tomb, and that's in volume one. And that's where I give the head count. And
yeah,
it's not in volume three.
yeah.
Oh well.
True enough, fair enough. Well,
Oh
all
well.
right,
Say
well.
say la vie, as they say.
There you go. There you go. So just before we get into addressing some specific questions on volume three, I
Sure.
just want to get from you, like where are you in terms of your four volume? I know you're working on
Uh,
your fourth volume, so what's going on there?
Yeah, well, volume four was completed, the actual writing of it, last December, which is what is that, like 9-ish months. But the editing takes forever because at the publisher, at least mine in terms of this book, they're the most careful publisher I've ever been with. I've been with, well, 50 books. I mean, I don't know how many publishers I've been with, and no, I don't have a head count. But this secular and non-secular, religious. And this has been the most careful editing I've ever gone through. So the book was done in December, and I just finished the last of the editing about 2 weeks ago. That's a long time. That's 9 months or so, whatever, on and off of editing. And I had three PhDs. I'll go through my manuscript separately. Now, I don't know one of the guys except to know he's very, very sharp, but I was told he had a PhD. The other two guys I know, and I know they both have PhDs, one in epistemology, one in New Testament. And it's the most careful editing I've ever undergone in just a long time. So it just got finished. And it's not due out until next August 15th, um, 26. And I don't know why the gap. I don't know why they put it back 6 months, supposed to be January,
Hmm.
but nobody at the press knows why that happened either. Nobody that I've asked. So I'm just live with the punches. My first response to him, Dale, was, "I hope I'm alive when that thing comes out."
Oh no. Yeah, of course you will be, of course. Yeah. That's yeah, okay. Well, that's great. Obviously I can't wait for the fourth volume to come out and we will schedule kind of the ultimate interview that we've been planning for years now to cover the substance of all four of your volumes there.
Yeah, and there's very few people who make an effort to do that. You've always been one of the ones jumping in the gap there and doing that.
Yeah, it's vitally important, and especially what we're doing here today, because like I said, I have had fans who I think are genuinely sincere asking about specifically your third volume, and some of these
Really?
objections that have come up.
Well, I'm
Um,
surprised, but
yeah,
that's fine. That's their right. I'm just surprised.
fair enough. Fair. Well, okay. So first thing I do want to get your take on, and it's basically a lot of skeptics have kind of taken advantage of you. You have sort of a policy where you want to engage in certain types of skeptics, credible scholarly types, whereas you try to avoid mentioning, popularizers or dealing with popularizers.
Right.
I just wanted to get from you, they will take advantage of that and say, well, see, Gary's afraid of me. He can't refute my arguments.
Right.
I just want to
Okay.
hear from you. What is your thinking behind that policy?
Well, I'll say positive and negative. I've not seen anybody. You see more of these responses than I do, for sure. But I've not seen anybody say he's afraid of me. But anybody who is thinking like that, they should consider three one-on-one debates against Anthony Flew, um, one debate against John Hick, one debate against, well, several debates against other skeptics, um, fairly big names. Thomas Sheehan of Stanford, he and I dialogued twice, once on coast to coast Canadian television, and that broadcast alone went over a quarter of the US. So you think about the ones where we do them in universities and they go out to the university body, and that dialogue went across Canada, and I think something like from the East Coast over to about Michigan. And all those people got it. It was a talk show. It was a well-known talk show, and Tom and I were on there, and and I know this. I'll just name one or two more, but one Dale that's not in this area, but everybody knows him as a prominent critic, and that's Michael Roos. And I dialogued with Michael Roos twice.
Mm.
So I mean, I think two with Roos and three with Flew, and John Hick and especially Sheehan. Tom may have been the toughest one here. I mean, these guys. Tom's a philosopher and a member of the Jesus Seminar.
Yeah,
So
skeptics.
yeah, well, anyway, what I'm saying is, if anybody says that, and again, I haven't seen it, but if anybody says that, if they think I'm running because they're going to give me their theories that I've not heard, I'm a PhD professor, and for many years, about 17. But these debates, you don't think I'm going to hear the best from guys like this? Um, I could after we quit talking, I didn't take notes before I came on with you. I might have put another list together, but I'm thinking, yeah, that's just not a question on my mind. Whether I'm shunning them because of their brilliance. When I don't even know who they are in most cases. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to put anybody down, but anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, there's only so much time in the day for someone like you. You're so busy and stuff, and you make the time to debate the top skeptical scholars. So,
Well, I will say, I'll give you a number. This is not a survey, it's a real number. I have had county written or oral dialogues, debates, call it whatever you want. Some are just discussions, but it might be with the critic. I think I've had about 50.
mm,
And they're not all skeptics. I mean, I debated formal debate. I debated Cornelius Van Til. Now, Van Til's not an enemy, so I'm not trying to say everybody here is a world-renowned skeptic. I'm not saying that. Michael, um, wrong name. James Crossley, the agnostic British New Testament scholar. He
mm,
and I debated before, and I dialogued with him in an Oxford book. It was a debate book, and he and I went head to head on the resurrection. So yeah, there are others here, and I'll think of more names when I hang up. But I don't sit there thinking about, oh no, I missed so and so with their blog that they wrote 5 years ago, and I don't follow those things. So I just don't follow them.
yeah, makes total sense. And I'll definitely check out. I like James Crossley, so I'll definitely check out the debate you had with him if
Yeah,
it's
I'll tell you, almost every one of those guys, Tony, um, John Hick before he passed away, Michael Roos before he passed away, James Crossley, very kind people. And they treat you like scholars. They treat you like, well, I don't agree with you, but I respect what you're doing here. I mean, just like little one-liners like that. And I can say the same thing about them.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome. All right. Well, I want to kind of switch gears here and ask you another common objection that's come up is, what is the point of this third volume? Why should we care about a scholarly survey? Do you think what is the value in appealing to a scholarly consensus and understanding that lay of the land?
well, I'll tell you what, I'll tell you about some goings on behind the scenes that caused this third volume. It was not in my original plan. I did those, what I called in the preface or the forward, the 1,500-page document that got shrunk in this process because it's already 1,000 pages printed. Nobody wanted to get closer to 1,500, I don't think. But I didn't even include this in my list of books. And the one day Mike Lacona was talking to me and he said, hey, that survey you've been working on and that document and all this and all that? And I said, yep. And he goes, you have got to put that in this set. And I said, why, Mike? And he said, because it's an invaluable piece of research. Nobody does head count stuff on that level. And it's going to help guys with MA theses. It's going to help guys with PhD theses. Now, this is just a saying on the side. They may cite they might cite my book once just to say, well, we cited him. And then the next 50 references that I have in the book, they may just include in their bibs, and just give it, chapter and verse.
Hmm.
But he goes, you got to keep that in there. But this will kill you, Dale. One day I was talking with him. I said, all right, Mike, I proposed it and they took it. Now we're up to 4 volumes. He goes, let me tell you something. And I said, what? He goes, the evidence volume is the most important one, volume one. But your all about volume, that we are calling volume 3, is probably, to me, Mike Lacona, probably your second most important volume in this set. So that's why it was included. If another scholar who reads and can hear that stuff. And notice, for most part, not always, I jump in and make comments once in a while. I am the author.
Hmm.
I'm the author of a collected set of books, writings. Um, if they can find value in that, notice I do answer some things, but I answer very little. And I let a lot of critical views just stand open and I never come back to it. I don't think in any of the 4 books. So,
Okay. Okay. Well, I am kind of wondering because I know you've kind of made it clear that you're include. Look, this is a scholarly survey, so you have a certain definition of what qualifies as a credible scholar
right,
versus not. So
right.
I'm just kind of curious because you have mentioned at times you will include people who don't really qualify as credible scholars. I don't want to name any names or anything, but you've included like philosophers who they're not a biblical scholar or something. What is kind of your process? Why do you include some skeptics who aren't qualified and exclude others? Like, do you have a way of discerning that?
By the way, you said like philosophers, and Dale, I know that's your field too. You and I should share some things there. Um, I would normally include philosophers in the list. Because I think they're usually pretty well trained. You don't get degrees in philosophy without being able to think, as a general rule. But if it's a philosopher, I'll tell you somebody, and I don't have anybody in mind, but if it's a guy who's got a BA in philosophy and he's done, or a BA in history and he's done, those aren't bad degrees, but I'm not inclined to just jump in and say they belong in here. Um, but I gave a definition of scholar, the way I was going to use it, in volume 1. And to go back to it, it goes something like this. My definition of scholar is somebody who has a terminal degree in a relevant field. Now, for most people, a terminal degree is a PhD, but there are people who get DPhils, like from Oxford, THDs, Dallas Seminary, and many other seminaries, old, even um, non evangelical schools. They give THDs. That's the or equivalent part. And I do have people in here with master's degrees without doctor's degrees because some people I have other reasons for putting them in there. They might be an excellent representative of a certain viewpoint that I don't have too many representatives of. I mean, I can tell you several of those, but I put them in there because I think they belong to have they are earned a day in the sun. Let's say my book's not the sun, but what I mean is to have their views heard. And when I don't give a critique, I think that shows I'm trying to be fair. Um, and
And again,
I,
these
I
are
guess you tell me this
allowances.
has even been questioned. Do you could be bringing it up here, but I get blamed sometimes for saying I cite more of those guys than others. Here's why. I cite mythers. I think they use that name of themselves. I don't think it's a derogatory term. Um, Mythers who doubt that Jesus lived rarely, rarely have graduate degrees, any kind, that are in a relevant subject. I'm not talking about a master's degree in electrical engineering. I mean, I'll give you the subjects. I'd say New Testament, Old Testament, theology, classics, world religions, because they're not doing Christianity, but I want their view too, because they can think about religion and they're trained. Philosophy, history. I think those people have a place in this. So if they have a terminal degree in one of those areas, and I wouldn't have a problem with an Old Testament guy with a terminal degree, and you go, well, why not? They don't even deal with the New Testament. Well, most Old Testament guys I know are very good in Greek, and they do very well with New Testament. Secondly, here's the point: they have the tools when you're used to working with text. So that's my definition: somebody with a terminal degree in a relevant field. But the other part of your question, I do have a number. I have, I think, a good number more responses from mythicists who do not have terminal degrees in a relevant subject than I do on the other end, say, where I include evangelicals who don't have terminal degrees, or maybe don't even have a BA or whatever. But I might include them because they represent a view that I don't have any other representative for. But I do that. If you ask me out right off the bat, what evangelical do you have that only has a BA? Dale, right off the bat, I don't know anybody, but I have a number of people without degrees on the mythicist side. So, man, and then I get blamed for not being fair. Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, I think it's to your credit that hey, you're going against your bias. You're being more lenient for the skeptical side. You're including
I
more
am.
skeptical views that really shouldn't be, but you're trying to be accommodating. So yeah, I think that goes against any bias claims or something like that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, so the one thing that I wanted to you mentioned Mike Lacona kind of talked you into, publishing your full research. And I think you even mentioned earlier that originally you planned on a 1,500 page book, your full research and stuff. And obviously, volume three, you haven't been able to publish all of that material and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to get from you what can you explain what are the differences between your scholarly head counting and stuff you did in terms of your minimal facts approach proper versus what's actually published in volume three, and why are there any differences there? Like why didn't you publish all 1,500 pages of your notes?
I think two things go in there. I was so tired after the first two volumes and then doing all the editing that I was glad to have Ben Shaw, who was my research assistant. He got a PhD, by the way, during that time. He got a PhD in philosophy of history. So, and Ben is publishing on this field regularly. He just did a blurb the other day for a really good new book that came out. Um, so first of all, the publisher said, well, volume one is not quite 1,100 pages. The second one dropped to, I don't know, I can't tell you exactly, but maybe 900 pages. So it went down about 1,500 pages. Okay. And they said, well, they didn't know at the time, but volume three is 1,000. It's like 5 pages or 10 pages short of 1,000. So it's 1,000. I think they thought, yeah, you need volume three in there, but I think 1,000 pages is enough. So I think that's for the volume three. It's not apologetic, and that's what most of your readers want. So it's valuable, but let's not overdo it. Okay. That obviously had an effect on me when they started. Secondly, Ben is the editor. So once Ben started typing this stuff and reworking it. See, when I put the names underneath questions that you see in volume three, see, this is another thing that critics don't realize when they say, oh, you didn't pay more attention to skeptics. But I did because I listed, Ben's about the only one that can prove this. I listed the big name critics first, then going down to a little less critical, then a little less critical, and sometimes I threw in a few evangelicals at the end, and I do mean a few. But by far, if I had a Crossan or a Ludeman or Marcus Borg or John Shelby Spong or Bart Ehrman, I would put those guys up top. And And for all those people who got tired of reading because it's 5 pages of names on this question, they quit reading, they'll never see the evangelicals at the end of the list. So I did that purposely. That's a whole nother aspect to this question of who am I quoting most. Not only do I quote them um, not evangelicals more than evangelicals, but I put them prominently. Well, Ben came along and said, "This will never do. This has to be in alphabetical order." So Ben put all the names in alphabetical order. So first of all, the company told me to calm down a little. It was 1,500 pages. Secondly, Ben retyped it, and it looks really nice in the outline. But he put alphabetical order. So the first, you could say, "You liar! The first 5 names are evangelicals." I had nothing to do with that. I had everything to do with putting them there, but not to put them in that order.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important to note that look, your intention was in good faith. You wanted to post all
Yeah,
1,500
yeah.
pages, but it was the publisher that made a decision for publishing purposes to kind of cut this down and stuff. So yeah,
And then Ben's typing.
and
I
Ben's
think Ben's right though. In retrospect, I don't know. I don't like the mix. I'd like to have the skeptics first and going down. I prefer that. But he made that decision, and I think the press might have even told him while he was typing to alphabetically would help everybody. Because if they were looking for a name and they don't find it, they don't have to look down 5 pages to find the guy's name.
yeah, yeah. That, like I said, and this is all disclosed by you in the introduction to your
Yeah,
volume three. So
yeah.
that this isn't a secret, it's kind of manipulative of some skeptics trying to make it seem like you're not delivering on the goods kind of thing. No, there are reasons beyond anything you had a control over. It was a publishing decision as to why it wasn't.
That plus the again, Ben probably got it was probably a publishing decision times two. He probably got someone to tell him we prefer the alphabetical order.
Yeah.
So
All right, cool. So, I wanted to ask you as well, how did you go about keeping track of all the scholarly opinions that you took, that you made all these notes on in terms of all the various aspects? What was sort of your methodology over the decades there?
I wished I could take a camera. I'm in my study here. I've got 100 shelves of books, and I have piles and piles of journal articles. Um, I don't know if you can see behind me here. Uh,
Yeah,
you see
yeah,
this?
pillow and books.
This is a pillow. Look at the big pile. You see that pile underneath?
Yes, I do.
That is one of many piles of journal articles. Okay. Over to my left, I have two of those big shopping bags that you carry a lot of heavy stuff in. I have two of those filled with articles. Over there, I have two drawers in my desk. Over on my other desk, I have French and German sources. Okay. So I don't know how I kept track of them, but first of all, I'm not trying to sound cocky, but the Lord's given me a good memory. I teach PhD courses without notes because I know the material. It's always in my field, and I don't vary too far from that. I don't have a whole lot of specializations. And so one thing is I can remember a lot of names from specific events from a long time ago. But the other thing is, as I would go through, I have a notebook here on my right. I forgot about that. It's got little tiny sheets of paper, little tiny squares where I put swoon theory adherence, hallucination theory adherence, hallucination answers. And I do that. So when I get it together, I pull these little tiny squares out and I am able to put them together. So some of it that's three sources right there. Some of them I have the sources right here with me. Now, in those old days, when this first started, I had to get the books from other libraries, and then my grad assistant, not Ben at that time, in the early days, they'd bring me 13 books and take 13 back to the library 2 weeks later. So a lot of them I don't have the sources anymore. Um, but those things I had to go back. Xeroxes, many, many piles in my study. It's just a joke to see how many. And thirdly, I would categorize them in notes. And fourthly, I remember a very good member. I remember reading a 1966 article from Raymond Brown on the resurrection of contemporary criticism. I remember where I was sitting, what he wrote, and the key sentences in that article that I really, really like. And I can remember that from 1966. I don't use it a lot of other times, so I don't. It's just there. So that's where it all comes from. All the above.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like any expert in a field. Like you live and breathe
That's right.
this subject for decades. You have
That is
this.
right. And it has been decades.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's not just a guess or anything like that. There's a scholars have this kind of intuition, which is an informed intuition as to the
But
lay of the land.
Dale, one more vote for volume three. Volume three is not apologetics. I'm not saying there's no critiques. Now, I don't count when someone of the book goes after somebody else. I mean,
Hmm.
I remember with Michael Roos saying about one of the critiques of Dawkins. He said Dawkins stuff makes me embarrassed to be a Christian. Okay, I can remember that quote very well. It's on the front of one of the key books, but when I say a lot of the critique, I would say a high percentage. I don't know. Don't write to me and say I counted and you didn't do it right. Not you, Dale, but the listeners. Um, I can't tell you, but my feeling is more of the critiques, if you counted them, were critics on another critic or a conservative on a skeptic. Many times it was a skeptic on a skeptic calling the other one a jerk. It was
Mhm.
just, it was amazing. So volume three is not an apologetic. It's a free for all, especially in that section, the long section on scholars versus scholars in the back of the book, toward the back.
Yeah,
So
I'll be
it's not
asking.
apologetics, it's so people can see what's out there, what people are saying, even if the guy critiquing you is an evangelical, or if the guy's who's going after a historian, a mythicist, is Bart Ehrman. You know,
Awesome. All right. All right. So I am kind of curious about your, scholarly intuition about the number of scholars, because here's sort of a hot take, but you've sort of surveyed about 6,000 sources over time on the resurrection and getting people's stances and stuff like that. I'm just kind of curious, how much would you say, how many individual scholars would you say are represented by those 6,000 sources? Because obviously
wow,
one scholar
wow,
could
you
write
you got
multiple
me,
books.
you got me on that one because that's something I haven't counted. You're right. Okay, first of all, let me tell you where the 6,000 comes from. One of the last, now there may be somebody might point out, no, you had another one after this, but date wise, I think one of the last dates I gave somebody who asked me put the count at 42 or between 42 and 4,500, right in there. Okay, but that was years ago. And even volume three, I turned volume three in what, a year and a half ago. I mean, this is my topic. I don't stop the resurrection. I do it for life. Okay, so now my question is, if the number is possibly 4,500 pieces of literature, how many have I done in the years since I released that? And I'm thinking, 5,000 is probably fair. But if somebody knew an objective number, they could say, oh, no, it's 5,759. Oh, well, thank you. I didn't know that. But I would take it up to 6,000. If my number's 5, the reason I take it up to 6 is because Ben has been my researcher for 13 years. He got a PhD published in this field, and he's getting published widely in this field. He's got 2 books out, and I have to count how many sources Ben has because Ben has given me sources to include in here, and I go, "Where'd you get this book?" I mean, I'll give you just a real example. I've got a source right behind me here in the shelf and another one over to my left where I've got scholars who compare Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and Hindu sources and tell me who has the better sources. And but I quit. I think 2 or 3 of those are enough to make that point. Well, Ben went out and found a number of other ones, and he does a PowerPoint that goes with, he's got a couple of them that go with his book on reliability, and he's found some others. Well, I have to count Ben because he edited this book. He put a few things in there that he found that I didn't read. So now I got to ask, how many sources did Ben do in 13 years? And I'll also remind the audience that Ben did his master's thesis on the minimal facts argument before I knew him. I knew he was a hockey player at Liberty. I did not know he was doing a master's degree.
Mm.
So I think it's fair that I include his sources because they got into this volume sometimes. So I think 6,000 is fair if you count Ben and myself.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, okay. So in terms of volume three, then, I know that it's been estimated you cite about 558 authors, judging by the author index and stuff like that. So
All right.
I'm just kind of curious, like, okay, how did you select why only 558 of the 6,000 sources and stuff? How did you select these people, these authors, as opposed to
Well,
others?
I think we have different numbers here. I think by 558, you're probably talking individual scholars.
Right.
But what if one of these scholars has 10 sources, another one has 15? And some of the guys who have the relevant literature, there are a number of guys who have multi sources. So now, if you ask me the question, um, how many of the 6,000 that you and Ben looked at, how many of them are, you did ask me that. You started with how many actual scholars. Dale, I don't know the answer to that. I've never checked. I don't know how many scholars. Maybe it's, see, and you could say, well, what'd you say, 5, what?
Uh,
I've not counted.
558 is what some people
558.
have counted.
I couldn't have told you that, but that's individual people. All right, then you got to ask how many were in the 1,500 that didn't make it in this that got cut out. You asked that question earlier. What got cut out? The additional, let's say this 1,000-page book was 1,100 written pages. There's still 400 pages there. I want to know what I want to know. I've never talked to him because it's not that big a deal to me. But I feel like asking Ben, "Hey, dude, who all did you leave out on this one? Or did you get tired of reading somebody's name, or you thought somebody's comment was really stupid, or maybe you thought it was really positive, but too positive because the guy doesn't look at it critically, and you left off the conservative, which I've done before." Um, so I don't know how many individual people, but that maybe five for me. I don't have a count. Maybe 5 for me, maybe additional 1,000 that been used that are not in mine, but in my count. But that would go back to his MA thesis before we started working together, and then 13 years where he was paid to do regular research in a fair number of hours per week. So I don't know how many.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
How many separate authors? I'm only talking about how many publications.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, when I say somebody might have 10, what if they have 10 books and 14 journal articles relevant? And you go, well, I know that guy. He doesn't have 14 on the resurrection. No, but how many things does he have as relevant? Does he critique the mythicists and not even mention resurrection? Does he? I've got a book over here on my shelf. It's one of my favorite books. 50 reasons the resurrection should make a difference in our personal lives. Okay, well, that's very creative. And I've told that author, I know him, and I've told him I love his book. So these are all from different everybody thinks I'm the stat counter. I don't actually count that many. I estimate
Yeah.
for the
And
most part.
another thing that you mentioned that I think is important in terms of, focusing on the literature rather than number of scholars. Well, what happens if a single scholar has one opinion at time one and then changes their mind or something like that? So in that case, it is helpful to keep track of the literature and in ch any changes and stuff like that as well.
Yeah,
So
I think you told me one time, Dale, and this doesn't come from my count because I don't read or count these things, but you told me that a few scholars, I think you said three, but a few, I'm not being specific. I didn't do the research. Um, a few of them were saying that I've said in lectures that I cite more evangelicals than non-evangelicals, but I claimed that I do more on the left side than on the right side. And they went back and said, no, 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 you got far more evangelicals. Okay. Because I've heard that from other people besides you, I went back and did a head count, if you can imagine. I don't know which one I did. I don't know if I did volume one. No, sorry. This volume three. I counted volume three. And it was almost, I mean, the percentage points, I didn't convert the numbers to percentages, but of everybody who cited, about three-quarters of the citations were to non-evangelicals and about one quarter evangelicals. That's 3 to 1. But if their point, I don't know, but if their point is, well, I counted the names and there were way more evangelical names. Okay, but what about what I just said a little while ago? That I would prefer, I mean, literally prefer uh, a Ludeman or a Crossley or a Cross N or um, anybody, those names, or even the Mythers. I would put them higher in the list than I would put evangelicals. And when I get down to evangelicals, I would know maybe 10 who said something like this, and I picked the best three. That's how I did it through the whole book. Nobody has to believe me, but that's the way I did it. So it's not how many names are in the book. There might be more evangelicals than non evangelicals, but I counted them here, and there were three times as many um, non people who don't want to be called evangelicals. As far as I know, and I know a good deal of them personally, I don't think they would want to be, but that's my judgment on who they were. But 3 to 1, and the evangelicals are much outnumbered, and that's what I mean in interviews when I say I count a well I count far more. I think um, not
non-Christian.
evangelicals than evangelicals, and I think that's fair. Not by just counting heads. That's kind of a to me superficial because that doesn't. If Crossan, I'm just making something up. If Crossan is cited 52 times
Mhm.
and my favorite evangelical is cited 15 times, I think that gives the upper hand to the non-evangelical. Oh no, oh no, no. What are they going to do? Say, no, that's 1 point for each. That's just a silly comment. You
Yeah.
know, first guy gets 52 comments and the second one gets 15.
Yeah,
So,
I think that so this is a good point. This was a key question that you wanted me to raise because yeah, some skeptics have mentioned they just go by a kind of a lazy quick scan of the author index and they say,
yeah,
oh well, there's 443 Christians out of 558 authors in the index. Therefore, you surveyed more Christians than non-Christians, but that misunderstands totally what you were saying when you say there's more
right.
non-Christian. You're talking about in the chapters themselves, you quote three times as many
How many
non-Christians
times?
for
And
each section.
don't forget, Dale, that the purpose of the book is not to say let's get an even number. The purpose of the book is let's get a representative list of names. And I don't want to have more evangelicals and have everybody say, well, you didn't do us much good because you didn't cite our people. They shouldn't be saying that, but it's like anything else. You get you get hit for how many people's names are there. I repeat, I actually went through and counted the names. And every so often I stopped. I did little stick figures so I wouldn't forget where I was.
And you did this for every chapter in the book, right? Volume three.
I went through the entire book, 3 to 1, not evangelicals. So I think what I've said is true. Oh, and we're not even counting how many were in the hundreds of pages that got cut out. So they could say, well, it's probably all your evangelical pages. Well, I'm not surprised. People who don't like what you're saying, who are bothered by it, or who are angry by it, unfortunately, many are angry about it. They can imagine whatever they want, but I don't think the stats help them at all if somebody wanted to do the work.
Gotcha. And just to clarify, so when you have said like non-Christians, you mean you're referring to non-evangelicals, like non-conservative fundamentalist type.
Well, and I'll tell you this, if you have the non-evangelicals, then they don't want to be called evangelicals. I would say the greatest number of those are guys over on the further left because of principles I already said, like some of these guys have BAs or nothing at all, but they're well known for a few books. So I put them out there because someone's going to say, "Where's my buddy? Did you do him in here?" So
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So another main thing that came up that I've seen some skeptics going on about is this criterion, and you do indeed mention this yourself in volume one of your book, where it's
yep,
there, where you have this 90 something percentile threshold, right? For you to, as the scholarly consensus criterion of being a minimal fact. So
right.
I just wanted to kind of throw it open to you. Is this something you've apparently contradicted yourself on? What did you mean by the 90 something percentile? And how did you go about determining whether a fact met this threshold or not?
Um, I only know of one place I've done that. Now there might be another one or two that you mentioned, but I only know off the top of my head. I only know one case. And there's a difference between prescriptive and descriptive. And I'm frequently asked in interviews, so I'm not asking you, they may say this, the interviewer, I'm not asking you, did you set up a criterion? I'm asking you, where do you think the scholars that you've cited line up? And I'll say, oh, they could well be over 90. But that's descriptive. I don't say anywhere in print that I know of, I don't say I only take the 90% who concede this fact or that fact. Like the keyword only or something like that. No, I'll say things like I don't count those where they're at when I say a high majority, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were over 90. That's descriptive. Prescriptive would be you got to be this high to be in the study. And that I don't I don't think
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever said that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I have heard myself a couple interviews where you do mention this 90, but you never give it in a prescriptive sense, like, unless 90% or more scholars believe it, I won't accept it. You've never said it in those prescriptive terms.
Yeah. By the way,
Is
Dale, while
that,
you're talking, I've had dozens of debates over the years, written, audio only, video, I mean, in person on college campuses and secular schools and so on. And one time, Mike and I were debating two scholars with terminal degrees in relevant fields. I think one might have been New Testament and one was theology. And the the I think the theologian made the comment, and he meant it critically. He said, now, and he was given objections to Gary Habermas's minimal facts argument. Okay. And he said, now, he said, and he wrote a paper for it, and it was in print in his paper, quote unquote, in print. And he said, you require 90%. I got it here. It's on this page, this book, and so on. And when I gave my response, I said, excuse me, please check that out yourself. It's descriptive, not prescriptive. I never have minimum that they have to abide by, then I would be skewing the data to say, oh, everybody's over 90. Wink, wink. They had to be over 90 or I wouldn't put them in the book. So you know what happened? The guy who was arguing against Mike and me, the two of them, the
Mhm.
one who made that comment, he went back while we were each doing our parts because it was a formal debate. It takes a long time to get four people through the debate. He came back later in the debate. To his credit, he said, I just went back and looked. I apologize to you for saying you require it. You're describing what your texts were. And I thanked him for doing it. It was very kind. And he just said, he literally said, I apologize for misrepresenting what you were doing. So other people besides Gary Habermas, Gary Habermas is not trying to squirm out of the you know
Hmm.
rear naked choke here.
Yeah. What there was an example you were telling me about before we started recording stuff, where it is evident, even in volume three, that you're not giving this prescriptive 90% because you're discussing one of the facts where it's only 80% or something. You had
Oh
a
yeah,
specific
yeah,
example. So like,
sure.
yeah, what's that about, if you want to
Well, I
explain?
mean, that's why I have 12 facts, which I reduced the list to six, and the six are my minimal facts. Now, I don't get angry at this because maybe I should have been more clear. But here's a real example. People will say over and over and over. I've probably seen this dozens of times in print. Someone says, well, you list the empty tomb as a minimal fact, and I go, I never. You find a place where I list from the beginning of my doctoral dissertation where I started this minimal facts thing. Um, I don't list the empty tomb anywhere. So somebody else might. I don't. Okay, so maybe it's my fault that I have this longer list of six. I probably longer list of 12, and then the short list of six, 50% of the facts are the minimal facts. Now, I put the empty tomb probably number seven because it comes the closest to being one of the six. But I not only do I never call it a minimal fact, I always make it, I probably made it clear dozens of times in my publications, the empty tomb was not one. So I think one thing about this volume three is, it sounds prejudicial again, but I'll tell you, I said it in the introduction early in this book. I said I didn't realize till we were going to print, and I had to write an introduction for this book at the beginning. And I realized that one way to look at volume three is how wide the agreement is for the six minimal facts and the other six, what should I say, almost minimal, the ones that, in fact, I think Richard Carrier in the Empty Tomb book, he says, I think he says, I don't know if he says I agree with, but I think he says I don't have a problem with any of the 12 except for the empty tomb. And the empty tomb's not one of my, and he doesn't say it is one of the minimal facts, but he said in that list of 12, I only have severe questions about the empty tomb. So there's a person who, but that might be my fault, Dale. Maybe I'm saying, I say 12 and then I go to six and people go, yeah, it's in your 12. Well, it's not. So I don't know. There's all kinds of these mistaken things,
Hmm.
but you go, well, why didn't you just do six and stop? Well, because I want to tell them that the second six are examples of other facts that may not have quite the skeptical support of the six or non evangelical support of the six, but they're serious enough that people um, grant these other facts. So, I mean,
Yeah, sure.
Dom Crossan's view that Jesus was thrown into a common grave, it's getting a few more takers here and there, but it is nowhere near a majority view. But he's out there, and people are taking him, and I put him in there, and Dale Allison says not the best position, but it's thoughtful, and Dale includes it as a thoughtful view, not one he takes. But you have to do this nuanced stuff, no matter what side you're on.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, here's a question. I have to admit, even I myself, when I first heard this was from a clip you did with Mike Lacona about a year
Right,
ago. And
right.
I admit I was myself was a little confused. And I reached out to you obviously to ask you about it, but you did kind of mention there that you said this quote that I only ever did a head count for the empty tomb.
Yeah.
I never did a head count for the other minimal facts. And to my mind, that did like I was like, what? I thought you said differently. So I just want to do you want to kind of explain like what did you mean by that? Like what do you mean you only did the head
It's the
count for the
only, it's not a minimal fact. But in other words, I never did it for any of the minimal facts to my memory. But what it is was when I'm talking about these huge piles of journal articles and books, 100 shelves here, and all kinds of stuff that I have on all subjects related, but resurrection is those journal articles. They're not ones that are non-resurrection. When I put all those together, I stopped and counted all the ones I had. Again, where guys I've quote cited that are more non-evangelical than evangelical. So I thought it was pretty fair. And in my earlier study before I wrote these volumes, I had some articles that came out. And I said that the count for the empty tomb that I saw was 75. Then a rash of skeptical sources came out about that time, and I lowered it. And I said, well, I've said 75 before, but let me move it to 67 to 75. Um, okay, for volume two, I did a head count of all the guys, as far as I know, that I have or knew about. And I didn't do it this way so it'd come to a nice round 80. But when I divided the scholars pro and con, it came out with 80.1% pro empty tomb or probably pro empty tomb. And what would the other view be? 19.9, whatever, not empty tomb or probably not empty. You say, why'd you count probably empty tomb? Because I counted probably not empty tomb too. That's just the way I chose to do it. But I had all these guys here, so I thought I might as well count. But the minimal facts are so well accepted. I think I'm going to be. If you said, "Well, hey, why don't you just do a study of all the guys who are agnostic over, or very skeptical slash agnostic or over," what would it be on Jesus didn't die on the cross? Huh. I'm going to be counting for a long time before I find hardly anybody.
Hmm.
Um, I think there are three major things in Jesus' in the New Testament that we can be that are allowed most times. I don't have a head count, but Jesus died by crucifixion. Secondly, his major teaching was the kingdom of God. The book of Mark starts out not with the Christ child, but with Jesus came forward preaching, repent for the kingdom of God is here. Um, so that's his subject matter. And then not the resurrection per se, but the disciples thought they saw appearances of the risen Jesus. So there's a lot of religions where I'm willing to say so and so thought they saw something, but I don't say that's not by a mile from they saw something. And I'm always careful to say in my second fact, the disciples had experiences that they thought were appearances. Those three are very widespread. And you got Ehrman and Ludeman and Crossan and Borg who'll say, yeah, the disciples thought they saw the risen Jesus. You're giving me that one, you won't have a problem with the crucifixion and the problem that the kingdom of God was his chief teaching. But I'll tell you this, who doesn't believe the kingdom of God is his chief teaching? The about I don't know what percentage, but a fair number of the Jesus seminar guys don't. And a whole bunch of other scholars will say, yeah, they don't think it was his major teaching, but like they're talking to the choir. They're talking to themselves. That's what other skeptical guys say. So no, I can give you where I think people are, but the empty tomb's the only one I counted on.
Gotcha. So just to summarize, the empty tomb, when you said that on Mike's show, what you meant is the empty tomb's the only fact that you did sort of precision counting for.
In
Like,
my library, I didn't go out of my way to do a PhD dissertation, and now the count is 5 times louder. I mean, larger. I
hmm,
just decided to just pool my sources here, and to show you I don't do that very often. It's the only one I did it for, and it's not a minimal fact. So
perfect. Perfect. All right. So I want to kind of transition into some questions related specifically to some of the content within your third volume. And one of the main things is where you survey scholars on, alternative type theories and how do they try to explain naturalistically the resurrection. So I just wanted to ask a couple questions. Well,
Sure.
let's start with this one. First of all, would you say there was a particular theory, alternative natural theory, that was most popular among the scholars that they gravitated towards?
Yeah, no, I started this survey. It started that what's volume three. I started as a chance to update my dissertation so that I could keep up on the data. It was for me. It was for me alone. And that's why Mike surprised me when he said, "Why don't you include it in this set?" And the publisher jumped at it. But the reason I bring that up is I did my dissertation in 1975. Sorry, 76. And so I started the survey in 1975, a nice round year. So if you're going back to 75 to the present, I wrote an article, I think 2001 for the Trinity Journal on the resurgence of natural theories. And I gave now that's another thing, Dale. If I'm not oh no, there's a number of skeptics today. Don't tell them that. Don't be honest. Why did I do a whole article in 2001 in a peer-reviewed journal and give name after name after name of people who followed um, natural theories? And by the way, that's another way to go after the count. There was almost nobody who took the swoon theory, virtually nobody. Not in the study I did for the journal. So, but what I'm trying to tell you is, since I went back to 75, you'll find way more natural theoretical adherence from 75 to 2010, let's say 2000, 2005, 10. Um, Today, I've had to backtrack in that article. Of course, it's 24 years later, but I had to backtrack and said, "Hey, remember my 2001 article?" Well, today, it is hard to find very many skeptics who take one theory and are willing to live with it. In other words, give you examples. Uh, um, I do mean this sincerely when I say unfortunately, but in the last 5 years, two of the best known real skeptics that took one naturalistic theory, which means they rejected the resurrection, so they are truly skeptics. However you want to. One called himself an atheist, and that's Gerrit Ludemann, the German New Testament scholar. And he says hallucinations. He doesn't like the word. He thinks it's pejorative. And I never got that till he said it. But there's a fair number of people who think that hallucinations means you're mentally ill. I don't know any evangelicals who think that's what it means. And so they're going, here's my first critique. You're all mentally ill. I mean, I don't know anybody who says that. But he didn't like it for that reason. Okay, he took that one. And John Shelby Spong took a very lesser held theory. It's a little bit similar to some hallucination parts, but it's not really that kind. Basically, Peter had an experience, and he talked everybody. Either he talked everybody else into saying they did too, or he was their leader, so they were willing to say, yeah, 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 we, Peter and we, you know, those two guys passed away. How many folks are out there who take a natural theory today? There's very, very comparative to my 2001 article, relatively few. And so when you ask me what would that look like, I go, well, understand, Dale, 75 to 2000, 2005 is way different than 2005 to 225. But if that's what you're talking about, today, here's by far and I'm sure I say this in the book somewhere, or in the 3 volumes. I'll probably say it many times. The most common response today is something really happened, i.e., oh, see, you're implying a miracle. No, I'm not. Hear me out, because I explain it. Something really happened means the disciples really believed the things they were teaching, but I don't know what in the world caused them to believe that, or I don't know what and they might add, I wasn't an eyewitness. I wasn't there. Okay.
Hmm.
But I count what did they think? Did they think they saw? I do that with other religions too. When someone says they saw something, say, well, they thought they saw. Josephus writing about Jesus. There's a good example. A new Oxford book has come out to vindicate that. But there's an example. He's writing what other people think. And you can't say, oh, Josephus was a covert Christian. That's unfair. Um, so yeah, if that helps, I think today the naturalistic theory is worse. That someone's willing to do this, pick one theory and stick with it, no matter whether you get blown away by the next book that's published by Oxford or not. And very few are willing to take a theory and stick with it. They usually say something happened, I don't know what, or a variant of that. In my opinion, this is a naturalistic or materialistic world. And so I don't think any of those things that can happen. But that doesn't mean I'm prepared to tell you exactly what happened. So I think that's where we are today.
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings up there was a skeptic who kind of raised an objection to your volume three about, there's folk Christian apologists and even myself included and stuff. When we're giving popular level presentations,
Right.
we kind of focus on this theory in isolation, this theory and pick, here are the pros and cons against these theories in isolation.
Yep.
But some skeptics have pointed to, well, there are combination theories. Look, life is complex. That there were multiple different mechanisms working in conjunction with each other,
Yep.
and that's where the explanation comes in. And in your volume three, you do have a section devoted to that, but
Yep.
you only quote like four scholars who
Uh-huh.
get that. So I wanted to kind of ask you about the combination theories. So
Sure.
yeah.
Sure. By the way, Dale, a word on where there might only be four there. Um, because it's an all about book. And if I don't have sources on certain topics, I didn't go out and dig five more out to make it look balanced. I put down what I had. And if it's not what I had, I'm sorry. I've got a pretty good representational piece here with thousands of guys, not thousands of guys, thousands of times. Ben told me, I didn't count, Ben told me we have between 7,000 and 8,000 footnotes in that book.
Mm,
That's not the same as 7,000 to 8,000 people. But when you have that many sources, and I only have four there, I'd probably go, knowing me, I'd probably go, huh, really? Okay. And I move right on because it's just a non-scientific head count that does sources. But I guess I would respond like this. What that person, whoever it was, if it was a specific person or specific persons, what the person forgets is if they pull out my volume two, I have a chapter. It's on naturalistic theories, naturalistic or alternative theories, because not all of them are naturalistic. I have a chapter called Five Reasons Why Alternative Theories Fail. And in that chapter, I have a specific five reasons. One of the specific reasons is combinational theories also fail. And I talk about it. That's chapter two. So I understand someone goes, I'm only writing a review of volume three. Okay. But volume three is not apologetic. And my point isn't how many people can I put up there. That's one response. Um, I have, and the other one is all the way through volumes one and two. I list people who have combinational views all over the place. I mean, for example, Goulder, the Anglican priest who became an atheist and left the faith, well, I'm talking about his main natural theory, and I guess volume two. When I'm talking about his name um, theory, I say at the end of it, oh, and he mixes this one and this one up with that one. There's one main one, and here's other two subpoints that he thinks goes into that one. And then when I'm talking about somebody else, I have a specific guy in mind here, but I'm just not trying to call anybody out. In volume one, I do another person, and I talk about their main theory. But because a person says there's parts to my theory and they involve other theories, I cite all the other parts to it and give the page numbers of the work, but it's because it's in another book. They go, wow, this is a pretty short section of this book. Well, my response is, yep, you're entirely right. It's a very short section. I'm not doing apologetics. I'm not trying to be exhaustive. By the way, I say that in the intro. This is by no means exhaustive, I say. But and if the person's doing a review of volume 3, I understand that. But if you want to be objective, see if I allow for other views, combinational views, in volumes 1 and 2. Or if I do it, of course, none hasn't appeared yet, volume 4. Um, I treat many cases of people who, well, you don't call them combinational theories. Who cares? While I'm doing hallucination, for example, I might say, well, anybody knows that if you take hallucination, one big problem is going to be what do you do about the empty tomb? So they might stick an anti-empty tomb theory in there. Oh, the disciples told the body. I mean, like virtually nobody says that, but they do that. So when I'm unpacking their theory, I unpack the whole thing.
Yeah.
And well, because if I don't do that, what's someone going to say? Oh, you said they only hold the hallucination. Did you just to round out their view? They get you coming and going, right?
Yeah.
So I treat combinational theories throughout these 3 volumes that have already appeared.
Exactly. And just I can personally attest that me and Gary, back when I was before I was a believer, I held to a combination type theory. So we discussed in detail, how did the conjunction of these different
You
mechanisms.
mean you personally with me, right?
Yeah, like before I was a
Yeah.
Christian, I was
Well,
bringing to you these theories and
yeah,
getting
I'm
you to
glad
believe
I'm
me.
glad you're remembering that because that shows you that either in my writing or privately. And well, I know you describe yourself as agnostic or something. Well, however you described yourself, I didn't go, well, Dale, I'm not going to talk to you about that. That's agnostic. I hate agnostics. I mean, I didn't do anything. We patiently worked through each one. But
Exactly.
I dare say that happens many times in the first 3 volumes, just because there's a little tiny section there with whatever you said, there were a few names. I'm not surprised. It's far from exhaustive. I just say, oh, well, that point's more not exhaustive than I thought it was.
There you go. There you go. Yeah,
So,
exactly. Exactly. So, all right, perfect. So my next question is, so this was one that you definitely wanted me to include as a question because it's really important. You have this interesting section where you have scholars, quotes from scholars talking about other scholars, and you have a
oh
whole
yeah,
bunch
yeah, yeah. What I call it, scholars versus scholars.
so I don't have I don't know what you called it, but yeah, it was scholars on scholars, something like that.
Yeah,
So
it's in the table of contents, and it might be the longest section in the book.
yeah, yeah, it's you've got a huge number of scholars there. I can go and grab it actually if you want me to, but
No, that's
I,
okay.
I'm just kind of curious about in general, this was a very important part of the book for you and very interesting. What are some of the insights that you gained, or what were some of the most attention grabbing parts of these scholars talking about each other and stuff?
Well, somebody's going to say I'm prejudiced. Somebody's going to say almost everything I'm saying is prejudice. I know that. But maybe the most interesting thing I noticed was I can't believe how some quote unquote liberals went off on other liberals. And you might say, oh, well, the mild liberals must have gone off on the really nasty liberals. Not always. I could give you examples. It could be we're all human beings. It could be um, atheist number one hated atheist number two's guts. In fact, I already gave an example. What about Michael Roos going off on Richard Dawkins?
Mm,
Now, I don't think I quoted Roos saying that, but when he said that, the comment, you correct me here, Dale, but I think the quotation was from Michael Roos, the agnostic or atheist, whatever he calls himself,
yeah,
philosopher of science. He says, Richard Dawkins makes me embarrassed to call myself an atheist. I guess that's it right there. He calls himself atheist, right?
yeah,
He says, Richard Dawkins makes me embarrassed. So one atheist embarrassed another atheist. That's a cover of a book. I don't think it's in my book, but that was the biggest surprise.
yeah,
Um, that some of these guys were very open to going off on guys and not always kindly. Now you could say, well, how come it didn't surprise you that evangelicals went off on evangelicals? Well, you're forgetting something. On other subjects, you could get reform guys going off on charismatics, going off on Baptists. You can find that. But my book is on the resurrection. Evangelicals are not going to go off on evangelicals saying the resurrection didn't happen. So that's not going to happen to the right. But I was so surprised. I would say the opposite is true. If you take a natural theory and I don't, I would say, well, let sleeping dogs lie. I'm not going to critique Dale because Dale's doing my job, but in a little different mean. No, these guys said some. There were some strikingly. I haven't read it for a long time. Maybe you've seen it, read that section later than I have. But do you remember seeing some pretty strong comments in there? Critics versus critics.
Yeah, based on my my scanning stuff, there were some interesting takes on that. And that's one thing that I really like to utilize when I engage in apologetics, whether it's historical evidence for the resurrection, but also even in the Shroud of Turin, there's also a lot of I use skeptics against skeptics. So, they refute each other. You have James Tabor versus Hugh Ferry or something like that. And I think it's very useful to use quotes like that.
Yeah,
So
but like I said, you're not going to find them on the resurrection end of the chart. Now, if you're doing the shroud, you can find evangelicals against evangelicals. But if you say, where are you on the resurrection? You're not going to get evangelicals call themselves evangelicals and then deny the resurrection. That's just not going to happen.
yeah, because yeah, obviously that's essential and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I don't like this guy. And by the way, I'm an evangelical, but I don't like the resurrection. Yeah, well, whatever. Then you're not an evangelical because that's the gospel and that's the center of you know, that's the center of the Christian teaching. So you'll find it more in the left. But all I'm saying is, I was surprised at first that it happened at all.
mhm.
Hey, I've got a whole chapter in volume two. That's a long chapter where when the German liberals would do natural theories of the resurrection, which made them pretty skeptical. They didn't believe in the resurrection. I don't know where you put them in the skeptical chart, but they're pretty far off. They would almost always blast the previous liberal. Oh, he takes the swoon theory. This is back David Strauss going off on Heinrich Paulus, who did this in 1825. Paulus did. And when Strauss is writing in 1835, 10 years later, and then when he does this book, a final edition of it in 1863, Strauss goes off on Heinrich Paulus and goes off on Schleiermacher, the founder of German liberalism. It's because Strauss is further to the left than Paulus and Schleiermacher are. But he leaves no stones unturned. But I have enough of a whole chapter, just German liberals, just going off on naturalistic theories. So
Yeah.
that's like a little precursor for volume three, that section of volume three.
All right. Well, I have something that I actually noticed about this section in the book in particular. As I was going down the table of contents, I noticed this very funny thing that, okay, so you have all these scholars going, talking about other scholars and stuff like that, but I don't see Gary Habermas or, Mike Lacona or Craig Keener in this section in the table of contents and stuff. So I wanted to kind of ask you, like, why you couldn't find other scholars talking about evangelical Christians like you and Mike and Craig there, or like why didn't you have a section on yourself and other evangelicals?
Well, first of all, there is a section on me because in the scholars versus scholars, they wouldn't be under my name. The criticism would be under the name of the scholar who made the critiques. And a number of critics made comments about, I've done a lot of books on the resurrection, and they went off on earlier things way before volume one. And so there's a bunch of comments against me in there. So here's the question. Oh, a lot of people compliment me too, but that's what the whole sides of the spectrum are. So why did I put him in there? Duh, I was trying to be honest. And so what do some skeptics say? He is so dishonest. He lies all the time. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have a name for you that says that. I'm just saying I hear those comments. I go, yeah, well, I'm not going to take time to tell you that on this page, but these nine scholars go off on me. But they do, and they go off on me. But I think more importantly, I don't have to. I've never defended myself in this one, so I don't feel like I have to defend myself. But but I like your point about Keener and Lacone and so on. That's that view of mine that I will put critics' views in there before I will put the evangelical views in there. And if that means Craig didn't get criticized as much, Craig Keener, or that Mike didn't, ask Mike. Mike gets enough criticisms as it is, um, but and often from other evangelicals. But that's not my book, not my subject, so he's not in there. But that's because I play down the evangelicals, not because I don't want criticism to be there, because I do that through every volume. Where that's my point about three quarters not evangelicals, one quarter evangelical. They're not there because I don't cite them.
Yeah.
So, and
Well, one thing
I didn't look up critics surveying their books because I'm not going to survey evangelical books here.
yeah. One thing that you said, just it's an interesting tidbit about Mike Licona there. And I noticed with Mike, he gets more criticism from certain Christians than he does from skeptics,
Yeah.
for whatever reason. So that's just an interesting thing I've noticed.
Yes, he does. And it's really irritating. But Mike's got thick skin,
Yeah.
irritating to Mike. And but Mike's got thick skin, and at first it kind of chewed him up, I can tell you. But over the years, I'll ask him, "Did you see what so and so?" He goes, "I don't even read that kind of stuff anymore. I don't know what anybody's saying," and that's a credit to him. I mean, why couldn't it be true that Mike and I, anyone else, you do debating, why couldn't it be true that we could be trying to be honest and above board, and if we tip the plank and the teeter-totter, if we tip the thing in on the liberal viewpoint, oh, you just want them to look bad. Really? You're going to go that far? I want their views to be out there. Why do you think I did, again, the 2001 article in Trinity Journal where I give nothing but citing naturalistic theories? I don't give refutations, as I recall. Why? Because it's a research book. Then what do you get criticized for? For not doing research. It's like,
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah. Some of the
I'm not
some,
saying we're not fair to them. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they're taking things out of context if they're saying the kind of things that you're bringing up.
Yeah, I really do. Yeah, I've noticed this, as you said, I've been getting involved in some debates and stuff like that myself with atheists and more recently Muslims and stuff like that. And you do see there's this bias in the comments. So like even before I open my mouth, all of the Muslim commentators, oh, Dale got baked. He's lost the debate and stuff. And I didn't even say a word. So like stuff like that, you've got to just kind of tune out and stuff like that. And it's I look
I'll,
for more
I'll
this.
give you I'll give you an actual case. This one is ridiculous. Years ago, I was asked if I wanted to write an op-ed piece for, I would tell it, but I'm not trying to expose anybody, the second or third best known liberal newspaper in the country, second only to the New York Times. And this one is usually, it's the Washington Post. Okay, so it's huge. And they said, why don't you do an op-ed piece for us? Why I believe in the resurrection of Jesus, and we'll give you 800 words. I'm thinking to myself, that's not very much, but if anybody's asking about my faith, I'm willing to tell you what I believe. So I wrote this article. I was, as I recall, I obeyed the 800 words. And here's my first paragraph. Knowing where a lot of the readers are going to go, guessing where a lot of the readers are going to go, I'm going to tell you up front. I cite the New Testament in here, mostly the seven indisputable books written by the Apostle Paul that even the atheist Barterman says are indisputable. So I'm telling you, yes, I'm using the New Testament. So don't give me the circular argument thing, because no scholars think that's circular to cite Paul. Not, again, not for what's true, but for what Paul thought was true. Okay, so and I wanted to be I crafted that paragraph so carefully. I took maybe 60 words because I knew I don't have that many out of 800, but I wanted them to be fair. Okay, the articles first, the responses started coming in to the paper article, And here's one of the earliest responses, Dale. One of the earliest responses. I told you these guys do this. They can't get away from citing the New Testament. They do it all the time. It's a circular argument. They cite their own text. If anybody can cite their own text, we would say they're wrong. Well, first of all, they don't call their people down as a general rule. But he goes, I can't believe they cite the New Testament. And that was his first response. My paragraph, he probably didn't even read a paragraph. But add to it that he was pretty ticked too. He seemed to be pretty mad. It's like that's what am I going to say? It's not fair. It's just not even fair. Oh, quit feeling sorry for yourself. I didn't say I felt sorry for myself. I'm just asking for some fairness.
Yeah. Yeah. Some
So
mutual mutual
that's a real
respect.
case. And by the way, the first probably 95% of the letters to the editor came in making similar comments. Prejudice, where does he teach? He teaches in a Christian school. He's
Yeah.
using the Bible. And that was their response. I'll tell you what happened later. Some number of students who were doing PhDs here and there saw the dialogue. I didn't write to them, but people who saw the dialogue and the PhD students started chiming in. And one by one, these big talkers dropped off the blogs. And one guy remained who said, I'm an atheist. I'm a PhD in chemistry.
Hmm.
I, and I don't believe in the supernatural, but I'm polite and I won't call you guys names. I hope you guys take me seriously. I take you seriously. And they had a good discussion for a week or two. And then the guy said, this has taken a lot of my time. I'm tired. I'm going to drop out of this conversation. And three or four of the well trained guys said to him, Bob, whatever his name is, Bob, I am so sorry for you to go. I found your spirit so refreshing that I just was glad you came in here. And he said, well, I was fighting the battle by myself. Now that's him talking. I'm fighting the battle by myself. All his colleagues, all the mean talkers were gone. And he goes, I just can't take it anymore. It takes too much time. And to try to be objective and have nobody supporting you, that's a whole new look at the subject. He said, I appreciate you guys being kind to me, but this is the last time you're going to hear from me. Out. And he said, I hope you all have a good day. And they said to him, they wrote nice comments afterwards. One guy remained down there and kept the discussion going for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Everybody respected him. It
absolutely.
wasn't me. I did not write to the editor. I was not involved in these discussions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as far as I know, neither were any well-known Christian apologists. These were just people who knew the data, because we've got good people out there dialoguing. So,
All right, fair. Well, I noticed you did mention the name Bart Ehrman, so I think I can mention him, and because this is a substantive objection where
all
he
right,
kind of goes after you on Galatians, and I think this is a crucial point where he kind of basically I think you quote him as saying like he supported, yeah, that they went, Paul knew the original disciples, Peter, James, and stuff, and he interviewed them um, about the resurrection appearances and got the
right,
details. And Bart Ehrman has come out and said, no, Gary totally misquoted me. He got me wrong. I never said that. It was always he went there just to confirm his mission to the Gentiles and stuff. So in the first way, I just want you to kind of address that. Is that true? But in terms of your volume 3 and your methodology, what sort of steps did you take to ensure that you are actually accurately quoting the scholars that you're putting in your in the volume?
sure. Well, the two questions there. I think I'm not saying anything. I've only met Bart one time, and he was very kind, and I don't have anything negative to say about him as a person. But um, I would disagree with him in this sense. Yes, I will agree with him on this. Paul went there, and in chapter 2, where he goes back a second time, uh, in verse 9, 2:9, they give he and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship. I take it today that means like laying hands on a missionary in the front of a church. But they commissioned them to take the gospel to the Gentiles while Peter and James took the gospel to the Jews. It was a big step in the early church. But here, I don't disagree with what Bart's saying. He was looking for enough agreement that they could all serve together. And Paul's slightly different message, because he's not telling them to, he's not in the middle of the go obey the law type thing. Of course, he had training in that area, he's Pharisee. As I tell people, Paul had basically a PhD in Old Testament. Um, yeah, but don't miss the forest for the trees. If you're going to give somebody the gospel, which Paul specifically says in chapter 1 and chapter 2, in fact, what's the whole theme of the book of Galatians? The whole theme is here's the gospel, get it right. If you get it wrong, you're anathema. I don't care if you're an angel, I don't care if you're a human being. You get this wrong, and you're going to be judged for it. That's Galatians. And sure, he went there to have his ministry. I tell everybody when I'm doing my timeline argument on the resurrection, I'll say in Galatians 2:2, Paul said, I went back up later to set before them the gospel I was reading, giving, to see if I was running or had run in vain. Okay, what's the gospel? Well, let's let Paul tell us what the gospel is. And for example, 1 Corinthians 15, the best known early creedal passage, which the Jesus Seminar said in whole or in either in the individual parts or in the creed as a whole, they voted that it was in existence before Paul, probably in existence before Paul set out to Damascus, where he was converted by a vision of Jesus or what he believed to be a vision of Jesus, the way I say it. Okay. But yeah, he wanted to be approved of them in his ministry of the gospel. He used that word over and over. What's the gospel? It's the deity, death, resurrection of Jesus. Paul says it over and over. Romans 10:9 is another creed, but it says early, probably 30s. But he said, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is the Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. Very stilted, but there's the gospel. Paul, in order to recognize him as bringing the gospel to the Gentiles, you have to know what the gospel is. And the gospel in those two texts, 1 Corinthians 5, Romans 10:9, I don't think anybody, virtually nobody would disagree with this. The gospel involves the resurrection. Paul says without the resurrection, there's no gospel. If there's no resurrection, there's no salvation. So part of commissioning Paul is to know what he believes about the gospel. That's why some skeptics have jumped in and tried to say maybe that's an interpolation. Maybe Paul's putting those verses in there. They don't like those verses in there because they know that means two eyewitnesses confirmed his teaching of the gospel, of which the key is the resurrection. So I'm not saying he wasn't looking for their blessing on his ministry. But if you're going to bless his presentation of the gospel, you got to bless his presentation of the resurrection. And if he says, well, Gary just says it too often that way, that's because it's in the middle of a lecture on the resurrection. And while I say what I just said, that he was giving the gospel message, my lectures on the resurrection, I'm going to emphasize that. But forgive me, twice in 1 Corinthians 15, he says, without the resurrection, there's no gospel. So it's got to be part of it.
Can I, and I'm sorry, I know I asked you a two-part question. Do you mind if I just one
Oh,
quick follow-up
yeah,
on
you
that?
did. And I need to do part two also. Go ahead.
Okay, so just a quick follow-up because I could see Bart coming in and saying, "Well, hang on there, Gary. You just said the gospel, according to Paul, is the deity, death, and resurrection, right? Would you say Paul asked about the deity of Christ when he met with them as well, or like what would you say about that?"
Well, I don't have a verse that says he asked him about the resurrection. But when I go through, when I see the gospel defined, I don't mean New Testament verses that say, keep preaching the gospel, brother. I don't mean that. I mean verses that say, here's the gospel. And it's usually either in Paul's writings or in the early Acts chapters, what are called the Acts sermon summaries, which are um, another kind of creed. And they differentiate. And the deity of Christ is there. Acts 1 through 5, for example, Acts 10 with Cornelius, Acts 13 with Paul.
Hmm.
It's always the deity is present.
But
And
I'm
these
just
are
saying, do
these are
you think Paul specifically asked about that when he went to Jerusalem? Because you were saying he inquired about the gospel. Would you say he also asked about that?
well, I'll tell you what, if I were Peter and James, the leader of the church, and I'm going to quote unquote commission a guy for the uh, foreign fields, mission fields, especially a guy like Paul, who we also learn there in the text. Early Christians didn't want to commune with him because he thought they were faking so that he could put them in prison, right?
Yeah.
So if I were those guys, I would say I couldn't see them. This is my view. I couldn't see them doing this without giving him a doctrinal test. And if I give him a doctrinal test, if I discuss anything, it's the gospel. Why? Because he says that's what they discussed in chapter 1, and that's what he discussed in chapter 2. Well, I don't want him going out there and being Arian and not believing the deity of Christ, but believe,
Yeah.
So I think it's either it, Paul was there with Peter for 2 weeks plus 15 days.
Yeah.
Um, I think it either had to come out or Peter was satisfied. Yes, I would say not that he went through a doctrinal test, but they're not send him to the mission field if he's telling them to obey the law and return to Moses. They'd have to be satisfied that the Christian gospel was coming out. So I'm not saying Bart is wrong. Overall, that's what he was doing. He wanted to be approved. But to be approved means to pass the test on the gospel. Now, I know Bart doesn't think, I know when Bart says it, he says, Jesus didn't call himself God. Well, I just said that in my PhD class last week at Liberty. He doesn't say I am God or the equivalent, but I would argue that he uses words that equal divinity or deity.
Fair
And
enough.
Paul does too. In a major few dissertations have been published now that the earliest Christology was the highest Christology. The German Wissenschaftlich series did a major one that the name for Yahweh was applied to Jesus in the very early epistles of Paul and elsewhere.
Yeah.
So if you want to unpack this, if anybody had any doubt, they could say, oh, no, we didn't quiz him on that. Now he's spouting the stuff off in the epistles. They didn't have any problem with it. But
Fair
anyway,
enough.
I'm not giving Paul a doctrinal test. I'm just saying I'm sure he had to be clear on the resurrection. Because you know why?
Mhm.
He was telling them his testimony. Remember that? He was telling who he was and how he met Jesus. If they're gonna ask him any question, it's gonna be this: how in the world did you become a Christian? Well, I met Jesus. Now, what we would say is he had an experience that he thought was a resurrection, and that's a fair way to say it. But how can they not ask him about the resurrection in 15 days? Because
Yeah.
Paul,
It just
you're
makes
here for
sense.
a reason. How'd you get here? Um, don't want to pull rank on you guys, but Jesus appeared to me and said I was an apostle.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
And I do want to get that makes perfect sense to me, by the way, in terms of the answers. So yeah, that answers it perfectly. But
yeah,
I do want,
nothing against Bart. I just think you have to get the whole message. Resurrection's got if you talk about the gospel, resurrection's got to be there. Period.
okay. But I am curious in your answer on the more general, volume three methodological thing. Like when you're quoting these scholars, the incident with Bart is just a case in point. Like what steps did you take to ensure you're quoting them accurately? And did you try to make sure that you're quoting their current positions versus older positions? Like what steps did you give to be accurate when you represented these scholars?
With Bart, I used three of his books in particular. Now, a lot of his are in the New Testament, and did Jesus believe in inspiration and so on. And Bart says in his book, Did Jesus Exist? Bart says both that the Gospels are reliable. I'm sorry. He says
And
both.
I'm saying just generally, it doesn't,
Right.
not just about Bart. Yeah.
Sure. He says the Gospels are unreliable, but he does name a number of portions in the Gospels that are historical. And I find Bart to be fair. And I've said this a lot of places, I find Bart to be fair, and he'll call a fact when he thinks it's fulfilled. And he says a lot of things where you can cite Bart and evangelicals be happy with him. In the three books I use the most, one you could say it's a little old, well, it is a little older, but in his book on the apocalyptic prophet, done I think in 1999, so let's say 2000-ish, and then his two books. I call them the red book and the black book because I use them without the dust cover when I bring them to class. And again, only PhD classes. But the one is, did Jesus exist? And the other one is, this idea that this Jewish preacher guy How did he become God? How did he think whatever? And Bart says a lot of things that are I cite him all the time in that book. One reason, Dale, that I think I quote him more than, but when I was counting the names in the book, I realized that very few people were cited more than Bart, a handful. But that's because Bart's not afraid to tell you his position on a lot of things. And if it doesn't follow him, I mean, I've been told, I've not seen it, I don't have the book, but I've been told that he says, I hope there's a good heaven. I don't believe it, but I hope there's one. And I don't believe in hell because I think it's unethical. Okay. Um, I appreciate his honesty. So he says those things. And then he also said, remember his statement, was it a debate or was it in a book? Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat thinking I may be consigned to hell. I'm paraphrasing. So I use him a lot. But yeah, if you want to talk about deity and um uh Bart Ehrman, he says, for example, in probably every one of these books, but I can get your quotes easily. I can pull them out in 2 minutes because I know where they are. Um, he says in one of those books, he says, I am not afraid to say that the disciples had some kind of real experiences that they thought were the appearances of the risen Jesus. He'll go, 5 of them, 12 of them, I don't know. But some of them, he says, had experiences. And then I think he includes the women too. So did the women. They had events that they believe were experiences of the risen Jesus. He said, "Am I afraid to say that? I don't think I'm. I don't think I'm making this stronger." He goes, "Am I afraid to say this? No. History backs this up. They had experiences that they thought were appearances of the risen Jesus. Well, it was Jesus as the Son of God. It wasn't like an Arian Jesus. So if you're going to take them, Bart could say, I really disagree with the area. I really disagree with deity and all that. But it's something different if you say, disciples believe that I don't. Or at least that's true of what he says about the resurrection appearances. Or the death on the cross, and there's the gospel. So if what he thinks is I'm overdoing resurrection in Galatians 1 and 2, I can see that, but that's almost always the lecture that I'm giving is on the resurrection. But I don't, I could be wrong, but I don't think he's not willing to say that when Paul sets before, he says in Galatians 2:2, I set before them the gospel I was preaching,
Mhm.
that would have to include the resurrection.
Gotcha.
Because the point in Galatians was all about the gospel. And Paul says, and that's by Paul. And
Mhm.
Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, if Christ wasn't raised, there is no faith. How could they have gotten by 15 days, at least with Peter, and blessed them to go to the mission field if they never even asked him what he thought about resurrection? That's all I'm saying. It had to be a good part of the conversation, or he already answered the question.
Mhm. So yeah, I
I'm not
see.
saying it's the topic, but I think it's an indispensable part of the gospel topic, which Paul said was his topic there. 2 different chapters.
Mhm.
He says the gospel was the topic he was
So I
uh,
think
thinking about. Yeah,
So I think you would kind of say, based on that sort of case study in general, when you're quoting scholars throughout Volume 3, you would look at their multiple sources and cross-check,
yes,
make sure, am I representing these guys right? I'm not just taking one quote out of context or citing
yeah,
it in
and
full context.
and I don't I want to be. You can say, well, you used 3 of his books. No, I use a number of Bart sources, but I did spend more time on those three: Apocalyptic Prophet, Did Jesus Live, and his what I call the Red Book on how the Galilean preacher became the Son of God. How he was promoted. And Bart,
Gotcha.
if I'm not mistaken, takes the adoption view, but the adoption view says a lot of very high things about Jesus. Now, again, Bart's going to say, yes, it does. That's why Jesus adopted him. There was a lot of heavy stuff there. I want you guys to understand. This is Bart. I want you guys to, what I think he'd say. I want you guys to understand. I don't hold those things. But I can affirm the things here that they said, and chief of which is what you said, they did have experiences which they thought were principles of Jesus. He specifically says, I don't have a problem because history affirms it.
Awesome. All right. Well,
I I hope they'd say the same things about me that I would be saying about them, mostly in this essay in this interview. Um,
Mm,
I think that would have to be thrown in there in Galatians. I don't say it was the only thing Paul was doing. I think when I often say in my lectures that in 2:9, where they gave them the right hand of fellowship and sent them to the mission field, that was a blessing on their missional activity. They had to know what gospel they were preaching.
mm.
In
All
fact,
right.
Paul says, I just remember this. Paul said in Galatians 2, a bunch of, we would say legalists today, a bunch of people tried to come out and check out my freedom. They thought we should go back to the law, and I, according to Craig Keener, most scholars think that Galatians 2 and Acts 15 are the same event. Doesn't mean Luke and Paul totally say the same thing, but they're the same event. And Paul said these guys came in to spy out our freedom, and these guys did. Peter and James did not take their view for a moment, and he was thankful for it. So if you're not going to do the law and you're going to do the gospel, and the resurrection is an indispensable part of the gospel, Paul says it had to be on the table and discussed. I think that's my view. He could disagree with me. I don't know what he'd say, but he can disagree with me.
Fair
I
enough.
think I'm fairly reading his stuff, and I think he definitely says they preached the appearances of Jesus because that's what they thought happened to them. And he'll go, I don't believe that, but I think they believe that. He said, because history shows it to be true. And you can find that in that book. The quote is very clear.
Yeah. Yeah, he has Mary Magdalene and Peter and other
Yeah, because
disciples.
he says in that same context, he says in the women too.
No, gotcha. Okay. So believe it or not, we did make it to the last question on our list, kind of thing, right around the 1.5 hour mark for you. But
Really?
yeah, so I just
Dale, I wanted to keep talking and you just kept pushing. So you're the good guy that kept us on the topic.
there we go. All right. So I just want to ask, is there anything else about volume three, or perhaps about volume four that's coming up that you want to tell the audience to be, to watch out for or to know about and stuff like that?
Ah, good question. Four makes two volumes that are largely not apologetics. So what you get here is volume one, evidence for the minimal facts, and also those other six facts. And true, I not only use Paul, I have, I think, 200 pages on the last chapter of each gospel. Matthew 28, Mark 16, I don't think teaches appearances, but Mark knows they happen because he got Jesus predicting them several times and telling the disciples, go to Galilee and you'll see me. So Mark knows that. Luke 24, John 20, John 21, and Acts 1, 1 through 11, up until the ascension. I've got like 200, so I use more than Paul. But I'm doing evidence. Okay, volume two, alternative theories. All right, then I say in the forward to volume three, I'm not really doing apologetics proper here. Yeah, some apologetics things come up and guys are arguing against guys, and I get involved once in a while, but it's not an apologetic book. I think I call it uh, what I call it. It's in the forward.
The
I
lay of
call
the
it
land, survey of the scholars or lay of the land.
lay of the land. I think you got it there. A lay of the land volume. Okay, four has some apologetics, but largely no. Apologetic volume four is the shortest one. And the people at B&H reminded me. I said, I feel funny with this book being smaller than the other three. And they said, hey, you probably forgot this, and I did. They said, you specifically told us that back when you signed your contract. Okay. I've already seen the page proofs for volume four, and it's over 700 pages. Now
Oh,
and that was like a semi-final state.
yeah.
But one of those, you better not add anything if you change your page number kind of thing. And then they have the other one where you go, you can't do anything unless it's a semicolon or a colon. Um,
I love that your shortest book is the same size as like Mike Lacona's entire book on there.
oh, there you go. And Tom Wright.
And Tom Ray, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if it's the same size as Mike told me that when his book was first advertised at the bookstore at the professional societies, somebody held up the university book, somebody from university, and said, come get Lacona's volume on the resurrection. He puts it right next to Tom's and he goes, look, it's a little bit bigger than Tom writes. And that's how he sold it. No, this one is, I'm trying to remember. I saw it at maybe 715 or 725 pages, but it's divided into two parts: resurrection and theology.
Mhm.
Because here's a really important point. And someone will probably try to prove me wrong or think I'm a jerk or something. I don't call the resurrection a miracle until volume 4. You go, what? I don't. I'll say things like Bob Smith calls it a miracle. Some people call it a miracle. If I say I called it a miracle, I slipped. Or I could be saying like what Bart says about the resurrection. I could be saying they thought it was, but I don't say myself. And that's because philosophically, I take, as so many philosophers do, and you know this, Dale, so many philosophers, even though they don't like David Hume's view, and I'll say this parenthetically, David Hume, as I understand it, you can put your 2 cents in this and on two. I know that's your area. Um, it's it's thought by more philosophers today that David Hume was a deist, not an atheist.
Hmm.
And that comes from his dialogues in natural religion, where he says he's the moderator and he sides at the end with the deist. Um, and and anyway, so left, right, or middle, probably David Hume's definition of miracle is taken by more people than anyone else. And David Hume says a miracle is a violation of a law of nature brought about by God or some invisible agent. Okay, it's a miracle brought about by God or some invisible agent. But the point is, God or an invisible agent. You go, what's an invisible agent? An invisible man? No, an angel. I mean, think about this. Maybe a demon, but an angel. David Hume says it's brought about by God or an invisible agent. And they that's you have to trace it to the hand of God. Because even if the angels do it in the biblical view, you got to trace it back to God because God created the angels and gave them that power. So what you have to have for a miracle is God did it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't now someone could say, well, I beg to differ with you because in volume 1 you got a whole chapter on resurrection and you say that's true. I give David Hume's definition. I tell you what my definition is. I don't tell you that God raised him from the dead. If you go back and see that, I don't think I did. So
Mhm.
anyway, in volume 4, I start out with three key chapters. I say God exists. I don't try to prove God's existence, but I give some considerations in favor of a theistic universe. Then I say Jesus claimed to be divine or deity. And 3, I argue that God wouldn't have raised a heretic from the dead. I don't know any other way. It seems like, oh, that's a Sunday school argument. Okay, well, you tell me what's wrong with it. You try to get out of it. If there's a God and he created everything, especially if he was there before if you want to tie it into like Big Bang things, before, and Jesus claimed he did it, but Jesus' two most prominent claims, I think, are the kingdom of God and how to get there. It's often said he held the keys. In John, it's believe. Peter says, why should we leave you? You alone have the words of eternal life. And someone goes, well, that's in John. Okay, well, fine. Look at the synoptics. If you don't take up your cross and follow me, and whoever leaves everything for me will have 100%. Okay. The kingdom of God and how to get there is he's the key holder. That's one. And if he claimed to be deity, book of Isaiah says, I will not share my glory with another. But in Philippians chapter 2, they take that verse, which is Jehovah, and applies it to Jesus. So I think those two claims make Jesus a heretic if he was neither one. Heaven, and you're not going to get there except through me. Wow, you're sure claiming a lot of power. And I'm the son of God, by the way, but Muhammad doesn't claim that. Uh, it's the unpardonable sin in Islam. Uh, Buddha doesn't claim that. Confucius doesn't do it. Lao Tzu does not do it. This is heavy stuff. And if the Father raised him, so I just argue that it's a theistic universe and God raised Jesus. Part 2, I go as far as the kingdom of God, and that's the first half.
Mhm.
The second one, what practical things follow from the resurrection? And I do a bunch. I wished I had more time to write. I could have done several more chapters, but I did. Um, what does the resurrection say to pain and suffering? What does the resurrection say to death and dying? What does the resurrection say to emotional doubt? What does the resurrection say? Here's a risky one, but it's deep. My deep view. What does the resurrection say about the way you spend money? What do you do with your income? What is your attitude toward the poor? I do all of that, but I tie the resurrection to those things. And so that's volume four. First half is resurrection and theology. Second half is resurrection and practice.
Okay. Well, given you said you're happy to talk a little bit longer, maybe for 15 more minutes, I do have one other question, follow-up question, if you want me to ask it, but it's totally up to you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. If I know you, I've known you for a long time. I could say, boy, you're as bad in your questions as I am in my answers. We both go longer. Of course, you could say you're going longer because I went so long, and I understand that.
Yeah. Oh, no. Okay. Fair enough. So yeah,
Fire away, Dale. That's fine.
very quick, and then this will be the last, I promise. So
All right.
I did hear a skeptic address. So this is kind of relevant to your volume four a little bit, where you give, prior probability type arguments for the plausibility of resurrection, things like near death experiences, obviously the existence of God. You mentioned other stuff like that. Now, I've heard some skeptics come back and say, well, look, Gary, this in no way does this make it speak to the hypothesis that Jesus rose from the dead. I could grant you NDEs. Okay, there's an afterlife. How does that help make it more probable a priori that Jesus rose from the dead? Like they try to state that the things you appeal to have no relation to the resurrection hypothesis in particular. Like, what would
I
you
think
respond?
I think they would like to. I think they would like to think that, and that's their privilege. But I take it both ways. In chapter, before I say this, before somebody calls me down, let me look at volume two
Mhm.
because I know I did these, but I want to make sure it's volume two. I have, by the way, five reasons for the failure of natural theories, which one of which is combinational theories. That's chapter 18. I mentioned it earlier. Okay, Appendix 2, Proving Naturalism and Related Views. Okay. And then in volume 1, my appendix was near-death experiences, the two topics you already mentioned. So I would use a 1-2 punch. And what I would say is God's involved here because you don't have a miracle if you don't have God doing it. I'll follow Hume on that. And so if God exists, that gives me one way to head start the resurrection because I don't think if Jesus died, as I like to say in my lectures, dead men don't do much. And if Jesus was truly dead, there has to be a raiser. If God exists, that favors the resurrection. You go, well, I know where you're going to go, skeptics. I know where you're going to go. I don't agree with you, but you're going to argue from intelligent design, fine tuning, and near death experiences, because I do in volume four and I've done it elsewhere. Yes, and I think I've got you coming and going because if God exists, Jesus is a false prophet. All right, then what about NDs? Because if you're a naturalist or a materialist, you well, I don't think you'd be a consistent naturalist or materialist if you believed in an afterlife. It's not your metaphysics don't involve afterlives. Bertrand Russell, books over there on my shelf. Bertrand Russell and his famous "Why I'm Not a Christian." He begins. Well, it depends. There's a lot of versions of what he does, but in the one I was reading, he says, "A theist is somebody who believes in God and an afterlife." And if you're a Christian theist, God and the afterlife, and you got to believe some nice things about Jesus. I thought that was hilarious. Some nice things about Jesus. And he defines it as at least that he was a good guy, maybe the best ethical guy that ever lived. Didn't put the gospel message in there, but he just goes, so now Christian has God, afterlife, Jesus. But a theist has God and afterlife. Afterlife does not come from naturalism or materialism. So in volume two, naturalistic theories, I say, can you prove naturalism is true? And if you can't, because see, Bertrand Russell, probably the best known uh, atheistic philosopher prior to Antony Flew, And Tony was there because the other three big guys had all died. Now, Tony was probably more influential than Mackey and Ayer, but I don't think he was more he might not have been more influential than Bertrand Russell. You'd have a big argument there. But Russell's gone. He says you have to believe in God or afterlife. So they ask him in another book, can you, I think he volunteers it, and I'm not a Christian, but another book, they go, can you disprove God? And he goes, I cannot. And Bertrand Russell was known for saying that. Now he muddies the waters because he goes, and neither can I prove Odin and he names these other ones, Jupiter. I can't prove them either. He's trying to muddy the waters and say, and just like they're stupid, the God of uh, Christianity's stupid. You're stupid if you believe that stuff. But if he is a naturalist and says he can't disprove God, we're justified, I think, in going time out. You want to question the resurrection because those kind of events don't happen, but your view is an anti-supernaturalist view, and you need to have God and an afterlife to be a naturalist or a materialist, according to your big name buddy Bertrand Russell. And Flew would say you couldn't prove those. He finally came to that famous book, God, There Is No God, and it's crossed out and is. So if you can't disprove naturalism, what business do you have to take my 12 arguments, minimal plus the next 6, for the resurrection and say it's all baloney because those things don't happen? And almost all of them, Dale, say that somewhere. Those things don't happen. On whose authority? Modern science. Excuse me. Modern science does not say all my experiments prove God to exist. And because Bertrand Russell was not only a philosopher, he was a mathematician. He belonged in those scientific circles in Great Britain. And he said, you can't prove it. What right do you have to judge my supernaturalism with reasons by your naturalism or materialism without reasons? And secondly, on the other end, Bertrand Russell and an afterlife. If there's an afterlife, otherwise just prove NDEs. But if there's an afterlife, how dare you rule out the resurrection and say I don't have a place for it because you're asking me to believe something stupid? Time out. Have you ever heard of NDEs? They're not relevant. You wish they weren't relevant. If there's an afterlife, you got to be much easier on the resurrection data because we know the metaphysical data that lie behind it. So I do one in volume 1 where I do NDEs. I do the other one in volume 2 where I do can naturalism be proven. And I cite a number of people like Bertrand Russell who don't think you can make that move. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can't. There are a number of skeptics who are saying they can't prove God right now. But I wonder what ground can you step in and go, I'm not going to listen to your arguments. I can hear you, but it's ridiculous because those things don't happen. And by the way, I'll just add this in a couple of sentences. Believe it or not, when they go, oh, so you're going to argue from what else do you have that would be a problem for naturalism? Resurrection was 2,000 years ago. Do you have anything right now? Yeah, I know 3 articles published in peer-reviewed journals now. I just learned of one the other day. Peer-reviewed secular medical journals were double-blind. One is for healing that's been demonstrated, and the other 2 were double-blind prayer experiments. I'm just saying that's not nothing like resurrection. But if you're telling me what kind of other data make you believe these things, I say healing, and here right behind me, I keep it close. Candy Gunther Brown, yep. Testing prayer. She's a PhD from Harvard. Well, you can say stupid people get through good programs. Great. Turn the book this way. It's published by Harvard University Press. Okay. Turn the book this way. And the 2 recommendations in the back come from a present and former members of Harvard Medical School saying, this is good stuff, you got to get it. So if you're going to ask me, what about the world? I'd say, I think there's good reason for God. I think there's great reason for afterlife. I like the resurrection. Here's double-blind prayer, 2 medical articles, and here's a 3rd medical article on healing. Now you're really up against it, and you can get mad at me. You can say I don't have enough data, but you can't prove your view at all. So where does that leave you?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. I've
that's why I
raised.
tied it in. But the first half of the book is resurrection theology, which is this kind of stuff. The other stuff is what does it resurrection mean to you pastorally?
Awesome. All right. Well, all right. At this point, I have been a bad host, so I will wrap up because I know Gary's got to go somewhere. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. Like I said, these objections raised by various skeptics. Again, we didn't mention anyone's name on purpose, but there were fans of mine, both Christian and non-Christians, who at least I think are sincere in wanting these answers. So that's why I felt it
Sure.
was really important to get your take, from the primary source out there. So
Say, Dale, let me say at the end, just in case we get nailed on this one, why didn't you made the point? Why didn't we mention any of these skeptics by name? Because I mean, there's a number of reasons, but one is I'm not trying to call anybody out on the carpet. I'm not trying to say anybody's dumb. I didn't say that about anybody. I think I don't call their if I call their name, they'll say I took them out of context. Whatever. You'll always have those arguments, but and Christians will say the same thing in reverse.
mhm.
But I think at least I know from my viewpoint, I don't know who you've done more research on that than I have. I don't know who the naysayers, let's call them. Um, we did it so as not to, at least my view, we did it because there's no need to call people out and act like we think they're entitled to their view.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's all about the substance and the truth. So,
And Urban's willing to grant that the disciples thought they saw the risen Jesus, but he denies it. I can say I don't believe their view, but I'm not going to sit here and rant. And that's why I have very little stuff in these volumes against naturalism or stuff. I make those 2 points natural, and they're both appendices. So, all
gotcha.
right, man. Well, you did a super job. Thanks for the interview.
No problem. Thank you, Gary. And yeah, I guess for the audience next week, I will be posting up my interview with Alan Rule, going over Jewish objections to Christianity, and Dr. Cheryl White on her new book on the Shroud of Turin. So tune in for that and take care, everybody.